Okay, our next speaker is Laura Weingarten, and her moderator will be David Schwartz. I did. So let me just briefly introduce Laura. Laura is I think, emblematic of the global citizen. She hails from South Africa. She lives in Toronto. And she has a very interesting background as well. She comes from a marketing background, and she and her husband are co-founders of a very interesting AI company called Diligen. I'm sure she'll tell us all about it, and I will simply say that Laura and Diligen are part of, we've mentioned Ryerson, and I want to just give a special shout out to them. They've just gotten their accreditation for starting law school, and my view is that the last thing in the world that we need is another law school, with the exception of a law school like Ryerson, which is, I think, really going to sort of start, with a whole new kind of sense of what it means to train lawyers of the future. And even before they became or have become a law school, they have hatched companies like Diligen. And so, without further ado, Laura, welcome and thanks.
Thanks, Mark. Hi, everyone. I'm Laura from Wyngaarden. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Diligen, as Mark mentioned. So I remember when I was in primary school, so this was 1990 South Africa, and I'd want to call a friend. And of course, back then, there were no cell phones. There was no way to text anyone. There was definitely no social media. And so I'd have to call them on the landline and then make really awkward small talk with their parents when they answered the phone while I waited for my friend to come to the phone. And so I got my first cell phone when I was about 13. It was a hand-me-down from one of my parents. And it looked like something like this. Some of you might remember this phone. It was like a black and white screen, or sort of dark gray and greenish, big pixelated text. And you couldn't do that much with it. But what you could do is change your ringtone and play Snake. Some of you might remember this game. This was not a sophisticated game. It was essentially just a sort of a line with a dot. But nevertheless, this was all pretty exciting. My presentation has disappeared.
Should have used the Nokia. It's in the phone.
Technology is failing us right now. Let's see. Okay, we're back now. Okay, so in my early high school years, homework research was done in the library with actual physical paper books, or at best with Carter Encyclopedia CD-ROMs like this one. And these were actually pretty amazing. They took an entire shelf worth of encyclopedias and compressed it onto one disk. My earliest memories of the internet were chat rooms in my mid-high school years. And if you remember, when you logged onto the internet back then, it made this absolutely terrible sound, which I'm playing for you right now to bring back those memories. It actually gets worse after that, but I decided to cut that for you. And what these chat rooms did for me was allow me to connect with all sorts of people from all over the world instantly, instead of the people who were just in my immediate physical environment. And that felt pretty magical. It opened up this whole new world to explore. As Arthur C. Clarke notes, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And technology can certainly feel magical when it allows us to do things we've never done before. 15 years later, and running an artificial intelligence company, it feels like a lot has changed from the days that we had encyclopedias on CD and screechy dial-up internet. I feel, and you might too, that a lot has changed technologically, And not just that, but the pace of change itself is accelerating. And we're not imagining that. Taking a look at this chart here, this is the time to mass adoption for various technologies over the last few decades. So we've got the airplane coming in there at 68 years. We've got 50 years for the phone, 38 for the radio, 22 for TV, 14 for PC, 7 for the internet, 3 for mobile phones, 2 for Facebook, and just 19 days for Pokemon Go. So what's driving this acceleration? What's causing technology to become more and more capable, more and more central to our daily lives? Well, one of the reasons is that we now have more processing power available to us than ever before. You may have heard of Moore's Law. So Gordon Moore was one of the co-founders of Intel, and in 1965, he predicted that the amount of processing power that we'd be able to buy for $1 would double every year. So in other words, in 1966, you'd be able to buy twice as much processing power as in 1965 for the same price. So Moore later revised his estimate in 1975 to doubling every 2 years. But Moore's prediction has remained more or less true every 18 months. So in other words, processing power available to us has doubled every 18 months. That's really extraordinary, doubling every 18 months. Our medicines don't get twice as effective every 18 months. Our airplanes don't fly twice as fast. Our investments don't generally double in value every 18 months, as much as we might like that. So when something is doubling every 18 months, that's really extraordinary. And we rarely see that kind of growth in any other field of human endeavor. Now, as humans, we tend to easily appreciate steady increases in things, linear growth. But we tend to underestimate just how fast things can change when they're doubling at regular intervals, when they're growing exponentially. So to illustrate this, let's take a look at an example. All right. So Star Trek fans might remember the episode where the Enterprise crew takes on board a small fluffy creature called the Tribble. Now, the trouble with the Tribbles is that their very high birth rate meant that their population was doubling. It was growing exponentially. Okay, so let's imagine in this scenario that it's Monday morning at 8 a.m. and I have 1 Tribble. And by 10 a.m. that Monday morning, I have 2 Tribbles. Okay, at lunchtime, I have 4 Tribbles. Now, so at this point, I still have a fairly small number of Tribbles. But by the time I wake up on Tuesday morning, I have 4,000 Tribbles. And by lunchtime, I have 16,000 Tribbles. Okay, so 1 to 4 over the course of Monday morning, 4,000 to 16,000 over the course of Tuesday morning. So at this point, the Tribbles are spilling out of all the cabinets and the elevators. But extrapolate that out, and by Thursday, you have 500 million Tribbles, or enough Tribbles to fill every cubic inch of the Enterprise spaceship. So here's the point. With exponential growth, small numbers get big fast. So here's the thing for us when it comes to Moore's Law and the steady doubling of computing power. For us, it's no longer Monday. We've seen this doubling since the 60s. So when we have twice as much computing power available to us as in 2017, the beginning of 2017, so 18 months ago, that starts to get really significant. And it allows us to do the kind of things we've never done before. It allows us to build technology we've never built before. It allows us to leverage our effort in new ways. It extends our reach far beyond what has been possible before. And that matters. As Paul Krugman notes, economist, a country's ability to improve its standard of living over time depends almost entirely on its ability to raise its output per worker. So put a little bit more simply, raise output per worker or do more with less. Unfortunately, that's exactly what technology allows us to do. It allows us to do more with less. And particularly, the large and growing amounts of processing power that we now have available to us have allowed us to create the kind of digital and AI-powered products that break the rules of the material world and allow us to do things that we've never done before. So particularly, it breaks the rules of physical goods, material goods, and allows us to create massive, accessible, and inexhaustible digital resources. So to illustrate this, I'm going to take you through the properties of physical, digital, and AI-powered goods and show you how they're different and why all this processing power helping us create these digital and AI-powered goods is a really positive thing. Okay, we're going to start with physical goods. So physical goods are everything from consumables like this apple to tools and furniture and machinery, the 3D objects of our everyday lives. So one of the properties of physical goods is that the more we use them, the less useful they become. Okay, so they get used up, they wear away, they break down, they have to be replaced. They have diminishing utility over time. They also generally can only be used by one person at a time. So if I eat that apple, then no one else can have it. If I'm riding that bicycle, then no one else can ride it at the same time. So they have a limited use. Physical goods just don't scale well. And once we've created them, they tend to give us diminishing returns over time. All right, so that's physical goods. Now let's contrast that to digital goods, because here's where things start to get really interesting. So digital goods are things like electronic books or apps, software, videos. And one of the properties of digital goods is that no matter how much you use them, they can't get used up. Their utility is unchanged. Another property of them is what is called non-rival, which means more than one person can use it at the same time. So both you and I and 1 million of our closest friends can watch a video and it doesn't get used up. And here's another example. So think of a physical textbook and then think about a YouTube lecture with the same content that can be accessed by thousands or millions of people. There's a fundamentally different relationship between the effort we could put in to create those resources and the use that we collectively can get out of them. And so digital goods can also serve us on a massive scale. Consider the 3 billion views that this video got. All right, so now let's talk about AI-powered products, because this is where things get really, really interesting. So AI-powered products have all the beneficial properties of digital products in being enduring and shareable, but they have this additional dimension which makes them even more useful to us. So what we saw with physical goods is that the more we use them, the less useful they become to us. Utility goes down. Digital goods, utility unchanged. No matter how much you use them, they don't get used up. But with AI, the more we use it, the more use we collectively can get out of it. So an example would be Siri. So Siri is, as I'm sure you know, Apple's artificially intelligent assistant. First released with the iPhone 4S in 2011. And since then, the millions and millions of interactions that users have had with Siri has made it more useful to each person who's used it subsequently. The more we use it, the more use we collectively get out of it. Okay, so we've looked at physical, digital, and AI-powered goods and looked how they're different. Let's track a single problem through those 3 levels of solution. All right, so let's say that you would like to get from the airport to this conference center. And to do that, you're going to use this physical map. So it's a bit bulky, but assuming it's up to date, you can use it and you can get to the conference center. But now let's imagine that everyone in the room, all of us, want to use your map. Well, that would be a bit tricky, and we could try and pass it between all of us, and that would be a bit awkward. But even if we did manage to do that, it would start falling apart at the folds and become less and less useful over time. So think about these map makers. If they want to help an additional person navigate, they have to print and deliver a whole new map. And as soon as the roads change, they all become useless, and they have to print and deliver them again. Not a super effective way of helping a lot of people navigate. Okay, so let's look at the next time you decide to use a digital map. So you pull out your phone, and immediately this is much easier. It's in this compact package. You don't even have to keep pulling over to look at the directions. It's going to read it to you. So you get here slightly faster. So now let's imagine all of us want to use your digital map to get from the airport to this conference center. Well, actually, this time we can all use your map. That's no problem. And get here just as effectively. So this is a really effective way of helping a lot of people navigate. Okay, final example. You want to get to the conference center, and this time you use an AI-powered map. And this map, instead of just giving you the most direct route, is going to give you the fastest route for you right now, given traffic conditions, because it's able to monitor and calculate these things in real time. And let's say you get here in half the time. So what happens if all of us want to use your AI-powered map? Well, actually, that's exactly how you managed to get here in half the time, because all of us were using the map. And it was monitoring how fast we were proceeding towards the conference center and rerouting us if there was a faster way. The more we use it, the more use we collectively get out of it. So this is a really powerful solution, and it's the level of solution that we want. So we've seen how technology helps us do more with less, and how AI helps us do, in some cases, a lot more with a lot less. Except when the clicker doesn't work. Okay. So now let's talk about something that I'm sure we're all thinking about. How are these new technologies, these new AI products, affecting the practice of law? Does anyone know what this is?
Telex.
Ah, very good. It is indeed a telex machine. Excellent. So this is a telex machine, and it was like electronic telegram. So it allowed lawyers to send written messages between firms. And so if you were practicing law in the early 1980s, this was state of the art, and all the big firms had one. And it allowed lawyers to do something that they'd never done before, which was written communication faster than the speed of mail. And it had the effect of speeding up the pace at which work could be accomplished. So if you were amending and negotiating contracts in the time of typewriters, the way it was done is you'd actually physically cut and then scotch tape the new text over the original contract. And apparently, when that original piece of paper got too thick to pass through the typewriter again, that was the time to stop negotiating the contract, because no one wanted to retype the whole thing. I heard a story from a senior partner who practiced at the time, and he told me what would happen very occasionally was his assistant would be chain smoking at her desk, and the ash would fall on the contract, and it would actually catch fire. And of course, there was no copy of this, so they were in big trouble. It was clearly a very different time. So the fax machine actually brought really big changes to the practice of law. And when I spoke to a senior M&A lawyer about what he remembers from this time, he said that when they first got a fax machine at their firm, the whole office crowded around in awe to see that first fax come in. And it was loud. And he said that it was actually the technology that changed the way he practiced the most, because it allowed law firms to exchange documents without having to resort to the mail or courier, or what was apparently common practice at the time, getting an art claim student to deliver the document. And it actually brought down the time it took to complete a transaction from 3 to 4 weeks pre-fax to 1 week post-fax. So it had the ability to speed up the pace that work could be completed for the client. So here's the lesson here. In law, technology has always evolved. Of course, the PC and internet had equally large changes or larger changes on the way that lawyers operate. And now it seems AI is everywhere. Taking a look at our AI legal landscape map here, we can see legal research companies like BlueJ or Ross, we'll be hearing from Andrew shortly, prediction technology like LexPredict and LexMachina, expertise automation like Neotologic, contract analysis software like Diligen. And this is a trend we can expect to continue. As Andrew Ng notes, AI is the new electricity. And we can expect AI to be powering all sorts of useful things over the years ahead. When it comes to AI, it can seem like a little bit of a black box. You have an input, and then some magic happens, and then you have an output. So let's take a closer look at what AI can actually do and what happens behind the scenes. And to do that, I'm going to give you an example of how users can train Diligen to recognize a new clause. Now remember, there are lots of different types of machine learning, but this will give you a sense of how supervised learning can help algorithms understand concepts in text, specifically clauses in this case. Okay, so to show you this, I'm going to show you 3 phases to get to your outcome, just training, feedback, and input, and impact. So we'll start with training. So Diligen is already trained to recognize over 100 clauses, but this is how you, the user, could train it to recognize an additional one. For it to recognize a new clause, which we'll call clause X in this case, you will start by giving the system some data. So you're going to give it examples of what you're looking for. Now, at this point, think of your machine learning algorithm like a very junior lawyer who's just joined your team.
No.
They're a smart person, but they're a smart person, but they don't yet know what you're looking for, so they can't be helpful. So you're going to start by showing them examples of what you're looking for. This is what clause X looks like. It looks like this and like this and like this, but not like that. And of course, the more examples you provide the system, the better its accuracy is going to be. So you want to provide lots of good examples. And that would be no different with your new junior lawyer. You've got to be a good trainer, right? Okay, that brings us to step 2, which is feedback. So feedback is the stage where your new junior team member actually has a sense of what they're supposed to do. They're starting to do work, but they're doing it under your supervision, and you're providing guidance as needed. So to borrow an example from a related field of AI, dog or bagel, it may take you a minute to make that calculation yourself. And if you're sitting at the back of the room right now, these all might look sort of somewhat delicious. So this is from the field of AI where they train algorithms to recognize objects in images. And most of the time, of course, it's not that difficult to tell apart a dog from a bagel because those are quite different. Except sometimes, as in these examples, they're not. And so in this phase of feedback, what you're doing is helping the system make finer distinctions between things. You're sorting out those gray areas. You're giving it that kind of feedback so it can become a more and more sophisticated and better at finding clause X in your contracts. So if it returns all of these as clause X, you can give it feedback and say tell it where it's gone wrong. Okay, so this is your final phase, which is impact, which is where you reap the rewards of the training you've done. So at this point, your algorithm is highly trained, able to accurately find clause X in all of your contracts. Unfortunately, this doesn't take years. You've now got it's probably within about 30 examples. And you've now got the equivalent of a very senior team member in that very, very specific area of expertise. So this algorithm is now able to find clause X in thousands of your contracts, or tens of thousands. And as we've talked about today, AI can be incredibly powerful in helping you leverage your efforts. And this is true here as well. So in the time it's taken you to train the system to look for that clause, it can now look for it in hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of contracts, and saving your team dozens or hundreds or thousands of hours, depending on your use case. And of course, all of your team can use this algorithm forever. It doesn't wear out. The more you use it, the more useful it becomes. That's true here as well. So let's recap a couple of the themes from today. Technology is magical in its ability to allow us to do things we've never done before. Technology has always evolved. And technology helps us do more and do better. So if Moore's law holds constant, and if in 18 months, at the end of next year, we have twice as much processing power available to us as we do right now, imagine what would be possible. And if we meet again at a conference in 4 or 5 years, our technology now, what looks to us like the very cutting edge, might start to look like the telex does to us now. And I, for one, am excited about what that means for the future of law. Okay. Hi. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
So great, fascinating presentation. I think it was excellent to hear a little bit about the history and kind of situate things. You talked a little bit about your company. Can you explain a little more about the company and what it does?
Sure thing. So, what we do is we're machine learning software for contract analysis. So we help lawyers and legal teams review their contracts more efficiently. And we do that by, the lawyers will upload their contracts onto our software that they would otherwise review manually. And the algorithms help identify certain clauses, they pull them out for them, compile contract summaries automatically, and help lawyers manage the review process as well. So all the things that are really time-consuming in contract review, our system helps facilitate that. So legal teams can do their contract review in a much shorter time period.
How did you come about entering the space?
Yeah, so it really came about by trying to solve a problem. My co-founder, Conrad, he was a corporate associate at a large global firm for years, and he spent a lot of time reviewing contracts. This was a weekends and late nights and, really painful task, I think. And I think if there are other corporate lawyers in the room who remember that from early in their career, it's a bit of a painful thing to do, all that due diligence. And, we thought that there had to be a better way. And at the time, we were also seeing AI pop up in all sorts of industries, medical and robotics, and start to see some interesting things happening. And that's where we thought, well, what if we apply AI to this problem? And back then, it was a stranger thought than it is now. It was, people definitely thought it was pretty odd. But now it seems that there's a lot of acceptance.
How long ago was that?
3 years ago.
3 years.
Yeah.
What are some pressures you see in the market right now?
Pressures. The way that what we're seeing is that we've gone from the point where using contract analysis software or using other types of AI products to do legal tasks has gone from sort of a fringe activity, where only the sort of most innovative firms would do it or consider it, to being much, much more normal and becoming, it's not quite expected yet, but going that direction. So we're seeing really, really good adoption, a lot of interest. And I think that a lot of these tasks where there are really good AI solutions for them, that will become the standard way you would do things. And going back to reviewing contracts manually instead of using AI would be a bit like being like, I'm just not going to use email. I'm going to handwrite a letter with a fountain pen and deliver it by carrier pigeon. You just wouldn't do it, right? It's just not efficient.
Okay. So one thing that I've heard a lot about is kind of the innovation community in Toronto. And I'm not sure if others here are familiar with it, but can you speak a little bit about that and also just kind of the scene in Canada more broadly?
Sure. Yeah, something that is certainly increased exponentially as well is the number of times that people talk to me about the AI scene in Toronto every time I leave it. So I know that I'm not imagining the fact that it's got so much more vibrant, and particularly the legal tech scene. Years ago when we started Diligen, we didn't have the sense that there was this blossoming legal tech community, and then as we went along, we felt like it seemed to develop around us. And initially we thought, we might be imagining that, but then everyone else told us this is what's happening as well. So, what we're seeing is things like, I think there's a number of things that make Canada extremely friendly to innovation. There's things like the government support for research and development, so you can get huge credits back on the salaries you pay to people who are doing research and development in Canada, so I think that's something that helps foster innovation. Canada attracts really, really talented people from all over the world. And if I look at our team, we have team members from 5 continents. It's incredibly diverse. Actually, minority of people are born in Canada on our team. Really, really highly skilled people who've come to Canada, and that makes the talent extremely rich there. And if we think about, we've talked, I think the legal innovation zone has been mentioned here, but it's worth talking about again, which is, the legal innovation zone it's grown out of Ryerson. It's a zone in downtown Toronto where companies that are solving legal problems, early stage companies that are solving legal problems, can go to be incubated and to grow their solution, and that's where we've come out of as well. And so there's the support of the government there's the support of law firms who fund it, there's obviously the companies there, so it's all the important facets of society coming together to say, we believe there should be legal innovation and we're going to support it.
So you talked in your presentation about the kind of training of the software. Can you tell us a little bit more about the process of getting the software up to speed, and how long is that period for a new user before it becomes really useful to the business?
Yeah, it can actually be no time at all. It depends what you're doing. People find our software incredibly intuitive, and you can essentially just start on day one and it can be useful. But it depends what you're trying to do. So our pre-trained, over 100 pre-trained provisions that it comes with are across sort of general contract provisions, M&A due diligence type provisions, and real estate, so lease review. And so if you're working in any of those sort of areas, this is going to be just immediately helpful, really very, very little startup time needed at all. If you're doing something totally different, you may need to put a little bit of time into training the system, but perhaps not as much as you think.
Okay, so turning more broadly now, so what changes do you see in the market coming up?
Well, as I mentioned before, I think we're seeing much more awareness now about AI and technology and what it can do. You can barely go to a conference now without AI being, one of the big things that people are talking about. And that was not true a few years ago, as I remember it. And so there's a lot more awareness. And it's not just awareness, and it's not just hype, and it's not just talk. People are actually using it for real practical purposes and getting business value out of that now.
So what areas of law are most amenable to AI?
It's often tasks where computers are very good at sorting through a lot of data to find specific things, and people are not so good at that. So if we're you've got 10,000 contracts and you've got an hour to find all the change of control provisions, go. That's a difficult task for a human, and a perfectly reasonable task for a machine. And there's of course the flip side. There's tasks that that machine will definitely not be able to do. But in areas where there's a lot of information is sorted through, where there is training data available to teach the system to look for that, those are areas where, and particularly repetitive tasks where it's something you'd be doing over and over, those are great areas for AI and for technology.
So in preparation for today, I looked at some of your writings, and so one of the things you've spoken about or written about is kind of the legal professional responsibility in AI. So what are your thoughts? Do you think that lawyers have now or will have soon in the future the obligation to use AI to satisfy their professional responsibilities?
It's an interesting question, and I think it's one that merits debate. And so perhaps it's a two-part question. If AI is better at certain tasks, and that we can debate that, I think in some very specific use cases, it is certainly, if you work with AI, you'll do a better job than if you don't work with AI. If it is better, do you have a responsibility to do things a better way or not? So when you're very close to it, it's difficult to kind of sort that out. So let's pretend this was in a different industry. Let's say that you needed to have surgery, and you went to a doctor who had, perhaps been a surgeon for decades. They had their own procedures that they liked to do a certain way. And there was new ways of doing that surgery, new ways that had been invented subsequently, but they were like, I'm just not into learning how to do that. I'm going to do it this way. It might have a lower success rate, and you have a slightly higher chance of dying, but this is the way I'm going to do it because I'm not going to learn the new way. You would understandably be outraged in that scenario and think that was unethical because, they're putting you in danger because there's better ways to do this, right? And so now translate that back into law. If there is a better way to do things, do you have to do it the better way for your client? That's the question.
Yeah, let's turn to some audience questions. Dan,
Well, yeah, I think you've identified a really important question here, and I think the ethical implications are really interesting. The rules of professional responsibility, the competence rule 1.1, the duty of technological competence under Comment 8, and then you think about Rule 1.5, the requirement that you not bill your client an unreasonable fee. I think it raises a lot of really interesting questions, but the key question then becomes, how do we demonstrate that these tools are better? And you're probably familiar with the LogGeek study that came out about a month ago. A lot of people probably saw this, human versus machine, and did this test where you had humans reviewing non-disclosure agreements, trying to flag particular clauses, and then they used their software to flag it. Right. And they were measuring precision and recall and F1 scores, and it turned out that the logging software did better. Yeah. So I was kind of curious if you have what you can tell us about any kind of testing you've done on precision, recall, F1 scores, things like that. But then also, to get to this point, what sort of scoring or testing should we be doing to be able to determine that this is better, using these tools is better?
Yeah, great question. So what that study showed is that machines were coming in at about people were coming in at about 85% accuracy on reviewing those NDAs, and the machine at about 95%. I might be off by a percent or two there, but it was more or less a 10% difference. So the machine was 10% better more accurate at finding certain things in those documents. So we find that holds true as well with our software, and that's what we tend to hear across the industry. That's about where it's at. And it depends on your human reviewers. Are these junior tired people at 4 a.m.? Are these senior people who do this all the time? Of course there's variables, but that's more or less what we're seeing. And so the conclusion to draw there is if you work with tools, they can help you do the job better than if you work without these tools. And that's not a surprising thing. We use tools for all kinds of things to help us do things better, right? So the question of how do you test this for yourself, your own, so there can be studies out there. You can say, generally it seems to help people do these tasks. How do I know it's going to work for me? One of the things that you can do is you can compare it to, let's say you had a M&A deal that you'd done in the past. It was done, you'd already got the reports, you knew what the outcome was. You knew where all those critical provisions you had to catch were. You can do a comparison. You can have people go in and do the same deal with the software to help you look for all those provisions and contracts, and you can compare it to an already known outcome, and you can have a direct comparison. So that's one way you can do it. Yeah.
So, Laura, you talked about the remarkable pace of change in technology and that it keeps accelerating. And you use that great example of the numbers and how they build up very quickly. So what does that say in terms of the legal industry's ability to keep pace with the possibilities that technology presents? And isn't there going to be an ever-increasing gap between what's possible and adoption? And what do we do about that?
That's a great question, Mark. I think of times of change call on us to be very flexible. And the more flexible we are, the more successful we're going to be, because we need to adapt to what is possible. And now more than ever. So, I think that certainly if I was a law firm or I was a company with a legal department, I'd be saying, how can we be as flexible as possible? Can we put in the structures to make sure that we are using what is available to do the work the best way we can? And to taking a proactive approach to being as flexible as possible, able to adopt technology as quickly as possible. That would be my orientation. Yeah.
Mr. Cohen's question about how this comes about. You describe your law firm associate partner having a problem and postulating that maybe AI could have something to do with it, and then you come to this highly developed tool. In terms of going from problem, I've got a problem, to what might AI be able to do, who needs to be in the room, or what skill sets do you assemble, or mechanically, how do you have that dialogue? I mean, I could participate in half the dialogue, but it's the dialogue, the half that I learned in a place like this. How do you bridge the skill sets gap to do the gap in innovation that Mr. Cohen asked about for bridges?
Right. So you're talking about how do you find out if there is an AI solution for a problem that you have? That's a great question. You know, I see a lot of firms now, and this is also sort of somewhat new, was not true certainly 3 or 5 years ago, assembling innovation committees out of people who are interested in the technology, and we'll find, you know, at most firms and most legal teams, there are people who are naturally just incredibly interested in technology and legal tech, will be up to speed, will go to all the conferences, will know what's available. And those people can be incredible resources, if you can find them, incredible resources in terms of telling you what's available, in championing those products and making sure you know, you take it through the process of, you know, looking at the technology, comparing it during the trial, and integrating it into your workflow. So I'd draw on those people and give them as much power to do as much as possible without a lot of bureaucratic structure if possible.
So I have used some contract management systems and contract review systems, but largely without AI in them. And I'm curious, so for due diligence, I agree with you that it can catch the abnormal clauses and things like that, but in an in-house setting where you'd also be using it to actually review and negotiate contracts and contract changes, how far can AI go today in actually like programming in or learning business rules where you say, okay, we realize this isn't the greatest clause in an NDA, but it's not something that we would actually spend time negotiating. We can live with this, but we can't live with X. We can live with X, but we can't live with Y. That's a deal breaker. How can AI at this point really learn that and not even then make any attempt really to have you negotiate the clauses that your clients have already told you they have tolerance for from a business risk standpoint?
For most of what you're talking about there, that is still in the human domain. So it's going to help you find particular provisions if you're like, I really need to check up on, you know, these few things which we always check for in our contracts. It's going to help you get there in sort of one click and find that information incredibly quickly, or even look across, you know, all of these contracts. What are the terms across all of them? It's going to help you do that very quickly, so you're not spending a lot of time on that. And then what that allows you to do, because you're spending less time on just finding what you're looking for, you're going to be able to spend more time really thinking about it, and those areas that really require expertise and judgment and, you know, detailed knowledge of how your business works, you can spend your time on that, which is what's really powerful about it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, the other thing you can do is just organize the system in a different way. So what you would do is, you know, you have your general training so you know what those clauses mean or those provisions mean, and then you can separate by potential issues and clients. So you can say, hey, you know, whenever we do deals with widget code X, those we always agree to, and you can actually show that via colors. So you can say blue is what we always agree to with these particular folks, purple we never agree to, yellow, whatever schema. So you almost use that initial shift, and then you add on just a different layer, but the training remains the same.
So you can actually, you're saying, program in some of that more in a business rule.
Yeah, so you would
How
just,
does that
and that's actually very manual, nothing to do with AI on the organization standpoint, because the AI found it, and then what you're doing afterwards is saying, on these matters, these provisions are generally accepted, that's hard programming, that's not AI.
Right.
So it just comes down to organization, but like we were saying, the decision to say yes to a yellow or a purple or a blue or all that is human, and that's why there's never humans outside of the loop with AI. If anything, the interplay makes both get better.
Exactly. Yeah, well said.
Actually, I'm just asking you to comment, Laura, but to the question from the gentleman a couple of questions ago about what are the possibilities within AI. One of the things that I find to be incredibly interesting is to throw this question back to the law firms the way that Ed Walters, the fast case, does and says, here's the sandbox. You cannot mess up too badly, but within these parameters, try it out by yourself and see what the possibilities are. So it actually creates this feedback loop where the law firms can start play with it, and then once they reach their capacity of lawyers not being coders, they can then reach back out to the experts in the industry and say, here's what we think should be possible, is possible. So I just want to see if you could comment on that development where the AI is going.
I think that's a great point, and that's exactly where we need to be, where we're having lots of really good conversations between the people who build technology and the people who use the technology. And at that intersection, that's where we're going to have some really great ideas. We need to keep having that conversation about what would be so great if it was possible with the people who can perhaps build it, help shape it.
Can I pivot from the AI in its use and assistance for lawyers, client service, advocacy, and the like, to decision making? So, you know, what Richard Susskind and others have been working on for years and years and years, right? Which is the utility and OADR and other developments, utility of AI present in the future to actually replace or augment human decision making, where the decisions are actually decisions that adjudicators have traditionally made, mediators have traditionally made. Is that, I mean, that's of course about the debate about expert systems. And expert systems can help in the development of, you know, of lawyers' utility. But do you really think it can help us and ought it to help us in reducing the human in, you know, in actually making decisions that involve law, right? So what a judge would do, what an agency would do.
I think what we'll see is we'll see the way we think of what is human work evolving. And that has actually always been the case. You know, there's things that we used to all do manually that we don't do anymore, and machines do them. And we, you know, our definition of what human work has just shifted in concert with that. And every time that happens, every time, you know, machines do help us do some of the more routine tasks, it gives us more time to go invent all kinds of amazing other things. And I think that's what we'll see. So I don't think the way to think about it's tempting to think about it as a finite pie. So this is how much stuff there is to do in law, and if the machines do the stuff, we don't do the stuff. You know, I think that's not the way to think about it. It's as machines do some of those time-consuming, repetitive, you know, boring things for us, we'll be able to solve all kinds of other problems. And you know, it's not like in any field of human endeavor, we can say we are perfect, we've solved all of the problems, we don't need any more time to solve our problems, you know. So I think, for example, the access to justice issue in law, you know, as we have machines doing some of the repetitive tasks that we don't need to do, can we put our minds to making sure that more people have access to justice, for example?
Can I press on that? So much of the focus on access to justice is finding legal services and legal advice and representation, no doubt about it, the 80% figure. Some of the problems of access to justice in the US and elsewhere is the overload and casework of administrative adjudicators. The vast majority, right, of legal decision making in all of our systems is not in the judge or at the trial court. It's in administrative adjudication. It's welfare benefits. It's immigration. All of that. So one of the promises, certainly as OADR show us, is the prospect that through AI-enabled services, we can actually not just engage in more efficient decision-making, but better decision-making. After all, the conversation about expert systems may well jive exactly with this tradition that, you know, goes back to Weber and even before, right? Is the notion of introducing expertise. If you can get that holy grail of expertise, then you reduce human decision-making with all its biases, with all its prejudice, with all its, you know, the judge decides based on what he had for breakfast, etc. So I wonder whether you're under ambitious in some sense in predicting a world in which many aspects of legal decision making, resolution of disputes, could actually be handled by AI enabled decision making.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and I think, you know, areas of the legal system where there's, you know, enormous backlog and just not enough people to address, you know, legal problems, we could see that some of those decisions could be made by AI systems, where it's a very, you know, perhaps first of all it will be the simpler decisions that need to be made, where there's a lot of known facts and it's essentially a decision-making tree, and AI could make that decision. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if AI starts to make some of the, you know, some of the more sophisticated decisions. And then it becomes, you know, the next interesting question that usually follows that one is, how do we make sure that AI doesn't contain biases of its own? And how do we not introduce that to it? And my answer to that would be, you know, as of right now, AI does not have its own opinions. It is, you know, its viewpoint, if we put it that way, which is not quite right, is shaped by the data we feed it. So we've got to make sure that our biases aren't in that data, because that data is what trains the AI and determines the way that it's going to be making decisions.
So did you say the bias is not in the algorithm, but in the data?
Yes.
I would challenge that.
Okay.
I would challenge that because what the algorithm does is it creates a correlation between data points. And it finds a certain correlation between data point is my face, or is a dog or not a baby. So it's not the data, it's the question which consequences are drawn from certain data points. And I have not understood the software used by US courts for defining whether someone is going to jail or not as a question of wrong data being put into the system, but an algorithm drawing conclusions out of a set of data. Or did I get that wrong? So is the algorithm really innocent and it's only the data? Or are there ways to program algorithms in a way that they come to different conclusions?
Yeah, well, there's a distinction here because the data, and when we say algorithm, I think that's already an issue. There's, you know, these systems use hundreds, if not thousands, of different algorithms all at once. So the idea of an algorithm is already kind of getting a bit outdated from previous understandings. Also using techniques like deep learning, et cetera, those images, when the machine looks at different points of information, it starts drawing conclusions that wasn't manually put in by a human being. So it actually, you know, with the dog and the bagel issue, it's a data issue. Because with enough photos of the bagel and a dog, it's going to learn the distinction between the two of them. So the issue that when it comes to the judge and the information, the factors that those systems will look at are anything that judges have used in the past to make those decisions. Therefore, what Laura's saying too is that it becomes a data issue because we use past data to inform these systems which will continue to operate either using some of the similar problems and biases that went into sentencing in the past.
But that'll improve, right? That's
That's
intrinsic.
exactly.
But the idea is 20 years from now, it'll be a combination of all those decisions, which are fixed
Yes.
data points, but improved through
Yeah.
decision making.
And the other thing is, you know, if you look at Netflix, where they had to make a documentary on what the problems with the systems are in the United States, these systems will be able to find those anomalies without a Netflix documentary being made, because you can just ask the system, how are Hispanic female offenders sentenced ba-da-da, 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 versus X, Y, or Z, and you'll get that information instantly, whereas the process, but now is a lot of manual, which is resource heavy. So these systems can then be used to shine a light on bias themselves.
I was sort of wondering, in terms of different possibilities of this, now that you've sort of developed the tool and commercialized it, if you're sort of speaking to other legal tech companies, or sort of thinking about different opportunities that you can use this tool for, whether it's sort of augmenting, creating sort of a more comprehensive contract solution, or just sort of what
Well, something which we announced a week or two ago was that we now have an API available, so people can actually use our clause extraction engine and build it into their own platform. So that's something which we are having quite a few conversations around, as other legal tech companies are interested in using our engine to power sort of related use cases. Yeah.
You mentioned in one of the earlier slides that one of the problems of the AI product is it actually becomes more powerful as more people use it. And you mentioned your product actually lawyers can train the model with the customized their needs. So my question is two parts. One is, do you do that across firms or lawyers? Like, do you share one lawyer's customization with the other? And the second part is, if you do, how do you handle the issues of confidentiality, privacy, or competitiveness?
We don't. We don't share them. So, once your system with your firm, anything you train stays on your system and doesn't go to anyone else.
So you're sort of not really going the full distance in terms of the AI sharing?
Well, the way it works is the pre-built clauses, the over 100 pre-built clauses that we have, you can opt in to keep correcting it if you want. The way that we find we get that question a lot, and most people want to get the benefits of having the training from other people without contributing. So we've thought about making it like you can opt in, but then you get and you give, But at the moment it works that you can participate and continue to give feedback to all of our existing algorithms. When you train your own, it's yours on your system. But that's not necessarily one person. You could have a firm with a dozen offices, and when you train it to recognize a certain concept, all your colleagues at all those offices are reaping the benefits. And as you all correct it, you're all reaping the benefits of having that algorithm, that machine learning model, be more accurate. So in that kind of microcosm, the more you use it, the more use you get out of it. For that firm, yes. Yeah.
How often do you find that the 100 pre-recognized clauses are sufficient for your clients? Is it 50% of the time, 80%, 10%? I mean, how useful are they to people practically?
Very useful. It's pretty comprehensive in those areas of M&A due diligence and real estate. And if you want to use it for other things, you can easily train it. So I think most clients will heavily use what's there and then develop a few of their own clauses. We certainly have people who want to use it for something quite different, and will do a lot of training. But it's very flexible. Yeah.
Which area of law is most used for AI?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Which part of law is most useful as compared to the other field of the section of the law?
In what area of law is AI most useful? So I think there's a few use cases in which it's proving extremely useful, and contract analysis is certainly one of those. It's widely accepted that it's really helpful in that particular area. And I'll let Andrew talk to his own area very shortly. But again, it's those areas where you've got perhaps repetitive tasks that you're doing a lot of, that the machine can take off your plate. When you're talking about tasks that are one-off, require nuance and complexity, involve human interaction, or very specific expertise, those sometimes don't lend themselves well to AI systems.
Okay, so I think we're out of time. Please join me in thanking Laura.